Welcome to the Compliance Officer's Playbook podcast. Today we're diving deep into a story that's got everyone talking. The Isle of Man, they've got this big evaluation coming up from MONEYVAL, and it's kind of a huge deal for them.
It is. It really is. It's like a financial health inspection, but on like a global scale, right? With some seriously high stakes. What's interesting to me is that this isn't just like a routine checkup. This is, a major stress test for their entire financial system, like how they handle money laundering, terrorism financing, all of that.
Yeah, their reputation is really on the line here.
Exactly. And that impacts their ability to attract investment, do business globally, the whole nine yards.
So for our listeners who maybe aren't as familiar with all this, let's break down why MONEYVAL is such a big deal. Like, what are they all about?
So think of it this way. MONEYVAL is like the European branch of the Financial Action Task Force, or FATF.
Okay, I've heard of them.
Yeah. And FATF sets the global standards for, combating financial crime. And MONEYVAL basically makes sure that European countries and the surrounding areas, meet those standards. So a good evaluation from MONEYVAL is like a gold star, right? It tells everyone, hey, this jurisdiction is serious about fighting financial crime. And that's what attracts investors, businesses, keeps their economy strong.
Yeah, it's not just about following the rules. It's about, their whole reputation and their future.
Totally.
We've actually got some sources here from the Isle of Man Financial Services Authority, IOMFSA for short, that give us a look into how they're getting ready for this. One of them is a press release announcing that the evaluation is happening in October 2026. And it sounds like they're really pulling out all the stops.
Yeah, I mean, everyone's involved. The press release mentions government agencies, private businesses. It seems like a truly national effort.
And they say that they're already working on updating their national risk assessment. And they've even got this new risk appetite statement.
Yeah, the National Risk Assessment is basically a deep dive into all the ways the Isle of Man could be vulnerable, to money laundering, terrorist financing, all of that. So by pinpointing those risks, they can, tailor their efforts to where they're needed most. And the risk appetite statement is interesting. It basically lays out like how much risk the Isle of Man is willing to stomach in their financial system, helps set some clear boundaries.
Boundaries, yeah, that makes sense. They're also gathering a ton of data, which seems logical. I mean, they need to prove you're actually doing the work and not just, talking about it.
Right, absolutely. They need hard evidence to show MONEYVAL that their systems are actually working in practice, right? So we're talking about things like, stats on suspicious activity reports filed, investigations conducted, convictions secured, all about showing those results.
Okay, so they're definitely taking this seriously. But one thing that really stood out to me in the press release is that the Isle of Man actually did really well in their last MONEYVAL evaluation back in 2016. They got positive marks on 39 out of 40 of FATF recommendations. That's like almost a perfect score.
Yeah, it's an impressive track record, for sure.
So do they even need to be worried?
Well, the financial crime landscape has changed a lot since 2016. A lot. I mean, criminals are constantly finding new ways to exploit the system, right? Think about, cryptocurrencies, online marketplaces, the dark web, all these things. These all present huge challenges for regulators and law enforcement.
So they can't just rest on their laurels. They've really got to prove that they're ready for what's coming next.
Yeah, exactly. They need to show that they're not just good at catching yesterday's criminals, but that they're ready for, tomorrow's. And that's where I think things might get a little bit tricky.
Tricky. How so?
Well, MONEYVAL, they're going to be laser focused on things like beneficial ownership transparency.
Okay, so making sure they know the real people behind those companies and trusts.
Exactly. And how effectively the Isle of Man enforces its rules. Not just what's written down, but actually enforcing it. Strong penalties for anyone breaking the rules and, proof that they're working with other countries to track down criminals. It's a much tougher test this time around.
So their past success isn't necessarily a guarantee that it'll be smooth sailing this time.
Exactly. And this is where that, public-private partnership comes in. The IOMFSA, they're actually using social media like LinkedIn to get the word out about the evaluation and emphasize how important it is for everyone to work together. Because it's not just a government problem.
Right. This impacts the entire island.
Exactly.
And they're using LinkedIn for this.
Yeah, I think it's pretty clever. I mean, they're trying to make sure everyone understands their role in preventing financial crime, from big financial institutions down to small businesses.
So we've talked about, the stakes being high, the Isle of Man working hard to prepare. But let's just play devil's advocate here for a second.
Okay.
What happens if they don't pass this evaluation? Are we talking A slap on the wrist? Or is it more serious than that?
Oh, it could be significant. I mean, their reputation as, a well-regulated financial center could take a major hit. It could make it much harder to attract new businesses, investments. Potentially we're talking about increased scrutiny from international organizations and, worst case scenario, even economic sanctions.
Wow. Okay, so this is not just a matter of checking some boxes.
Yeah.
This is really a make or break moment for them.
It really is. They can't afford to take this lightly,
It'll be fascinating to see how they handle all of this.
for sure.
But are those sanctions realistic, or are we being a little alarmist here?
I mean, sanctions, that's definitely the most extreme outcome, but it's not outside the realm of possibility. We've seen it happen to other jurisdictions that have failed to meet international standards. I think the global community is taking financial crime really seriously, and they're sending a clear message that complacency just won't be tolerated.
So the pressure is definitely on.
Yeah.
This deep dive has really opened my eyes to how complex and important these evaluations are.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a great example of how the fight against financial crime has really gone global. Any jurisdiction that wants to be part of the international financial system, they need to be prepared to meet these standards.
Yeah, for sure. We've covered a lot of ground here, but there's still more to discuss. What specific challenges do you think they'll face as they prepare for this evaluation? And, what strategies can they use to ensure a positive outcome? That's what we'll be diving into in part 2 of this episode, so stay tuned. Okay, so we're back for part 2 of our deep dive into the Isle of Man's MONEYVAL evaluation. Last time we were talking about how the stakes are really high and they've got this great track record, but the goalposts have moved since their last evaluation in 2016.
Yeah, it's like they aced the pop quiz, but now they're facing the final exam.
That's a great analogy.
Right.
So this exam is about showing they're not just good at following the rules, but understanding the bigger picture.
Right, like how financial crime is actually evolving.
Exactly. So practically speaking, what are some of these areas where MONEYVAL is going to be extra tough this time around?
So one of the biggest areas of focus is going to be beneficial ownership transparency.
Okay.
So they want to make sure the Isle of Man has a crystal clear picture of who's really behind all these companies and trusts.
So no more shadowy figures hiding in the background.
No more shadowy figures.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And haven't they already been working on this? I mean, they've got that beneficial ownership registry, right?
Yeah, they do. But MONEYVAL is going to be digging deeper this time. They'll want to see proof that the registry is accurate, up to date, and most importantly, accessible to law enforcement when they need to trace, dirty money.
So it's not just about having the registry, it's about making sure it's a useful tool.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
What else? What else are they going to be looking at?
So enforcement. Enforcement is a huge piece of the puzzle.
Okay.
It's one thing to have, laws on the books, but if you're not actually investigating, prosecuting financial crimes, those laws are toothless.
They're toothless.
They're toothless.
Yeah.
So MONEYVAL wants to see that the Isle of Man isn't afraid to actually go after the people breaking the rules.
So we're talking about like hefty fines, maybe even jail time.
Absolutely. Strong penalties are a deterrent. It shows that they're serious about upholding their commitment to fighting financial crime. But it's not just about punishing the bad guys, right? It's also about working effectively with other countries to track down criminals and recover stolen assets.
Right, because crime doesn't stop at the border.
Exactly.
Okay. But how smooth is that international cooperation, really? I mean, have there been instances where they've hit, like, roadblocks in getting the information they need?
Yeah. International cooperation, it can definitely be tricky, right? I mean, different countries, different legal systems, priorities. Sometimes you have political tensions that get in the way.
Oh, for sure.
But the Isle of Man has been actively involved in various international organizations that really help facilitate that information sharing. One of the big ones is called the Egmont Group.
Okay.
And that's a network of financial intelligence units from around the world. So they basically share best practices, coordinate strategies, and stay ahead of emerging threats.
It's like a global network of crime fighters all working together.
Exactly. Exactly. And their participation in these groups shows that they're really committed to being a team player,
Right.
in the global effort to combat financial crime.
Okay. So we've talked about the challenges, but they also have some strengths, right?
Yeah, of course.
I mean, they've got that impressive track record. They're taking this seriously. What else do they have going for them?
Well, one of their biggest strengths is their willingness to learn and adapt. They're not shying away from the fact that the standards have changed, and they're proactively updating their systems and strategies to meet those new expectations.
Yeah, they're not resting on their laurels.
Exactly.
And what about that public-private partnership we were talking about? They're really making an effort to get everyone on the same page.
Yeah, I think that's a huge asset. By using social media, outreach programs are educating businesses, individuals about their role in preventing financial crime. So that widespread awareness, buy-in from the private sector, that's essential for creating a really effective AML-CFT regime.
So it's not just about the government cracking down. It's about fostering that culture of compliance.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But there's one thing that I saw in the IMFSA press release that I wanted to ask you about.
Yeah.
They mentioned they're going to be publishing their updated national risk assessment later this year.
Oh, yeah.
Why is that a big deal?
That's a really important step because, the National Risk Assessment basically lays out all the potential ways the Isle of Man could be vulnerable to, money laundering and terrorist financing. So it's kind of like a roadmap for their entire AML CFT strategy.
Sort of being transparent.
Exactly. They're saying, hey, we're not trying to hide anything. Here's what we see as the risks, and here's how we plan to tackle them.
So more transparency, more informed decision-making,
Exactly.
stronger AML CFT framework. It's good for everyone.
It's a win-win. It's a great example of how they're taking this, proactive and collaborative approach to the whole evaluation.
Okay, so we talked about the challenges, the strengths, some of the key elements of their preparation. But let's go back to that big question. What happens if they don't pass? I mean, is it really as dire as it sounded?
Well, like we discussed, the potential consequences, they are serious. Reputational damage, difficulty attracting investment, increased scrutiny, and worst case, sanctions. But it's important to remember that MONEYVAL's goal isn't to punish jurisdictions, it's to help them improve their systems.
Okay, so even if they don't get a perfect score, it's still a valuable learning experience.
Absolutely. It's a learning process, and MONEYVAL is there to offer guidance and support along the way. The goal is to create a sustainable, effective AML-CFT regime that, protects them in the long term.
So it's not necessarily pass-fail, but a chance to demonstrate their commitment and identify those areas where they can do even better. Okay, this deep dive has been so insightful. I feel like we've really, uncovered some interesting things here. We've talked about the challenges, the preparations. We've even explored some potential consequences. But there's one piece of the puzzle we haven't really touched on yet, and that's international cooperation.
Yeah.
How does the Isle of Man's relationship with other countries impact their AML-CFT efforts? And what challenges might they face navigating that complex world? That's what we're going to be exploring in the final part of this episode, so stay tuned. Okay, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into the Isle of Man's MONEYVAL evaluation. And we've talked about a lot, right? We've gotten into the details of what they're doing to prepare. We've even talked about what can happen if things don't go as planned. But there's one big piece that we haven't really talked about yet, and that's international cooperation.
Yeah, this is where things get really interesting because fighting financial crime isn't something you can do alone.
Right, it's like a team sport.
It is. It really is. It's a global effort. It requires countries to work together, share information. I mean, think of it like a massive interconnected web of intelligence and enforcement.
So for the Isle of Man, this means what?
Yeah.
Sharing information about suspicious activities, coordinating investigations with other countries, maybe even extraditing suspects.
All of that. They need to be a reliable partner in this global network, sharing what they know, acting on information they get from other countries. The truth is, no country can tackle these issues alone, no matter how strong their own systems are.
Right, because criminals don't exactly stop at the border.
They don't care about borders,
Yeah.
so our response has to be global.
That makes sense. But I imagine that can get complicated really quickly. Different countries have different laws, different priorities. Sometimes there are even political tensions that can get in the way. So how do you even begin to navigate all of that?
Yeah, it's definitely a balancing act. But one key tool is something called a Mutual Legal Assistance Treaty or an MLA.
MLAT.
Okay. Yeah. And these are basically formal agreements between countries that make it possible to exchange information and evidence in criminal investigations.
So, if the Isle of Man is investigating a case that has links to another country,
Right.
they can use an MLAT to get things like bank records or witness testimonies from that other country.
Exactly. And it works both ways. The Isle of Man is also obligated to help other countries when they get requests through these MLATs.
Okay, so that's the official way to cooperate. But what about the more informal stuff, the intelligence sharing that happens behind the scenes? How does the Isle of Man play in that space?
So beyond MLETs, they're also active in a lot of international organizations that are focused on, fighting financial crime.
Hmm.
And one of the biggest ones is the Egmont Group.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of them.
Yeah, and they're a network of financial intelligence units from around the world. So it's like a global club of financial crime fighters.
I like that. A
Yeah.
global club of crime fighters.
And they basically share best practices, coordinate strategies, try to stay ahead of those emerging threats.
So it's kind of like a high-stakes poker game, but the stakes are, the safety and security of the global financial system.
I like that analogy. And how well the Isle of Man can navigate these relationships. That's going to be a big part of their MONEYVAL evaluation.
But, I mean, how much cooperation is enough?
Hmm.
How do you balance being a good partner with protecting your own interests at the same time?
That's the million-dollar question. And it's a question that every jurisdiction has to deal with. You need to share enough to be effective, but you also don't want to compromise your own security or your competitiveness.
Right.
It takes a lot of, building trust, working within those complex legal frameworks, sometimes even overcoming political obstacles.
That's not easy.
It's not easy at all.
Okay, so this MONEYVAL evaluation, it's not just about their internal systems. It's about, like, their global citizenship,
Hmm.
their ability to work with other countries, play nice in the sandbox.
Exactly. And the results, they're going to have implications not just for the Isle of Man, but for everyone. I mean, a stronger Isle of Man means a stronger global financial system,
Right.
one that's, less vulnerable to criminals and terrorists.
So we all have a stake in this.
We do.
Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. We've really gone deep on the Isle of Man and this evaluation that's coming up. And, it's clear that these evaluations, they're really complex, they're important, and they're about way more than just checking boxes.
I agree. I mean, it's been a real journey exploring all the intricacies.
And the takeaway for our listeners, whether you're a compliance officer, a business owner, or just someone who cares about making the world a little bit better, is that we're all in this together. The fight against financial crime, it takes collaboration.
Yeah.
And each of us has a role to play.
So stay informed, stay adaptable, and remember that, a safer, more transparent financial system, that benefits everyone. So thanks for joining us for this deep dive. And if you enjoyed it, be sure to subscribe to the Compliance Officer's Playbook podcast for more insights and analysis from the world of compliance. We'll see you next time.